Okay, I know all of you have a lot of questions, so I'm going to try to keep mine to a minimum. And we'll take questions as we go along. But let's start off with a couple basic ones. I mean, obviously, as we think of the autonomous car, it's evolving over time. I mean, now we're seeing the interest in putting NFC in the car and other types of applications. Can you kind of highlight some of the applications or technologies that we're going to see evolve into this connected autonomous vehicle over the next couple of years?
Yeah. So one of the things that I have not mentioned yet is the changes in the in-vehicle networking architecture. So for example, changing from CAN, LIN and FlexRay into Ethernet. So what you see is modern cars, of course these cars, especially the higher end cars like the Mercedes S-Class or BMW 7 Series, they are sitting already today on more than 150 control units, which basically means the wiring harness is heavier than I am, kilometers of cable, and the data rates are pretty high. And of course you need to have a certain device or domain-based architecture, like in huge IT buildings in the past. So we knew it only from huge houses in the past. But you need to have similar domain-based architectures now in the car to separate the various concerns. So in case an infotainment branch gets attacked, it is only the infotainment branch. In case the engine management branch gets attacked, it's also not spilling over. Yeah? And we see now Ethernet being the enabler for these type of architectures, including, of course, products that we have like secure gateways, and you're really going to a much broader or different system setup there. And that is enabling very different car architectures, also in the infotainment part of the vehicle.
Okay. Any other comments?
I would just add to what Lars said. It's pretty fundamental when you think about what's happening moving forward. Vehicles taking over control momentarily or even for longer periods of time, and that security aspect that we've been talking about. That's why this change in vehicle network architecture is so important, that you literally have a gateway or firewall interface between the outside world and the inside world that's actually controlling the vehicle. And that change is, you know, at various stages across the globe depending on different car makers, but it's pretty much universal in terms of its long-term outlook. So that's going to be a pretty fundamental shift from the way things used to be to the way they'll be moving forward in the future. And it's because of security and the need for supporting this level of automation.
Well, I would add one element which doesn't matter, which is the dollars. I mean, the average semiconductor content of a car today is about $340, $350. If you think about a level 3 to level 4 enabled car, Lars walked us through the levels, the additional semiconductor content only for this level 3, 4 capability is another $400. So what I try to say is you double up the semiconductor value of an average car by making it level 3, 4 compliant. Just to give a feel for the size of opportunity of this from a business perspective. I mean, the $350 on average today make this already a $30 billion market. Now, adding ADAS, if every car had this, you would double the market. Now, of course, it's going to take some years, and I mean, it's still the auto industry. It's not the fastest one on the planet. But I think it gives us a sense on what the size of opportunity is and why this is so relevant for NXP.
Well, in addition, they've been displacing a lot of the mechanical systems we've had in the past, so there's kind of a cost offset there.
Yes.
So, you know, as we think about, you know, one of the problems we have with the automotive industry right now is the fact that they don't like to play together. I mean, we've seen some areas like around the mapping the environment and stuff like that where auto manufacturers have played together and the industry's played together. You know, where are the areas that the industry's coming together, and where do you think we need to work on?
Well, honestly, I think it's not entirely true that the auto guys are not playing together, because you see in certain areas really joint engine developments and these type of things. But you see these cooperations or collaborations in areas that are non-differentiating, or where you need scale, and the proprietary development gets so obscenely expensive that you cannot fund it. So with that, this is basically what we try to do. We try to scale, being in mass volumes as a semiconductor player, and then basically providing the Lego blocks bring your own algorithms if you want to differentiate. Scale the system to the right level if you want to have, let's say, a smaller, cheap car with a basic ADAS system, or you want to have a fully fledged, as Kurt said, completely full-blown autonomous driving car. But the Lego blocks should be pretty standard, and then the differentiation is on the algorithms.
So we can refer to you as Lego guys now?
Yeah, sort of. Yeah, electronic Lego guys. Absolutely. Yeah, that's basically the mechanics. Yeah,
you know, after seeing the printed car, that kind of fits.
You know, I think I agree with Lars. There's more alignment than people realize, right? But I think it's more on the foundational elements than the differentiating ones that they see, right? And if you think about foundational elements, we talked about reliability in the automotive space. There's quite a bit of alignment on what's expected for reliability in the space. You take safety. We have standards out there, and customers agreeing how to implement safety. You take security, right? Yeah, there's vying standards, but they're all relatively similar, and they're converging more than diverging moving forward. So you take those foundational elements, I think those are starting to, or are aligned. Then once you start going up to the next level, yeah, it's not as clear.
I think where this becomes a big topic is when you lift it one level, which is where the auto industry needs to collaborate much more with other industries. Because I almost feel that the term automotive doesn't do justice anymore to what we talk about here. We should maybe talk about mobility or safe and secure mobility or something like this. And that is not the traditional home turf when you think about the services which are needed, when you think about over-the-air updates, when you think about connectivity, even security capabilities. That's not the home turf of the classic automotive industry. And I believe this is where we can play, and we do play, a very important role, because we are engaged with these other industries anyway. I mean, NXP is not just an automotive company, but we play actually with all of these other players, which could advance and could accelerate something which is a much more connected industry. So the term is a little bit overused, but this idea of an Internet of Things, in a way, it just comprises the car as another thing, right? I mean, it's a big thing, obviously, but it is one more which is connected. And that is clearly not something any industry could do on its own. And this is where, I mean, all the questions about what about the new entrants into the auto industry, etc. I mean, we are actually pretty agnostic to this, because they will all need semiconductors, whoever wins the race in the end. But what clearly happens is that we can connect them, and we do this very actively. And the speed of development is also getting faster, because with people like Tesla and Google entering the space, I mean, they just change a few paradigms. It doesn't need to take 5 years to develop a car. There is different ways to do that stuff. And that accelerates the industry, and we are right at the bottom of it.
Well, and I liked your reference to calling it a robot instead of a car. So, kind of. So do we have questions from the audience? Mike? Oh, hold on. We got mics coming around whenever you have a question.
You got Mike sitting here.
Indeed, Mike for Mike.
Does that work for you, Jim?
Yes.
Mike Krell from More Insights and Strategy. So, given the length of time it takes to design a car, given the length of time people keep cars, and this whole transition that we're talking about, when do you actually see anything really effective in the world happening, and how long is it really, I mean, when you look at the timeline, it's kind of funky, because again, it takes a long time to design a car and to transition enough cars on the road that have these kinds of technologies. By the time most people have them, the first generations are already going to be obsolete, et cetera. So just talk a little bit about how you see the timeline rolling out and when we can really see things happening on the roads.
Yeah, so rule of thumb is what we know from other technology introductions, be it Bluetooth or restraint systems or whatsoever. Roughly between, let's say, 12 and 16 years to have a certain level of mass market deployment, which is basically simply the exchange of one industrial platform against the next. Not talking about retrofit or aftermarket type of solutions. For car-to-car solutions, we're discussing that at the moment. So, for example, bring your own P&D-like device or retrofit solutions could make sense there big time. Not for all use cases, but for a certain set. And well, for the truly autonomous driving, I guess really to mass market deployment, it will take that long. What you for sure will see in the next 5 years on the road is cars that 85-95% of the roads can drive autonomously. And what I mean by that is you have this motorway assist that I mentioned prior, and you have these driving patterns that Google is doing at the moment. So driving on pre-scanned routes. Just assume I'm going on a trip, visiting my parents 500 kilometers away. My car can pre-scanned drive from my house to the entrance of the motorway. Then switches 480 kilometers driving on that motorway. And after 490 kilometers, it pulls out of the motorway exit and then has to decide, does Lars need to drive or can I drive autonomously? This is the technology that you will see in the next 4 or 5 years on the road. So it feels pretty much like autonomous driving under all conditions. As said, the self-driving in downtown Heidelberg or in a narrow Italian city, that will take longer. But this is probably also not what we will all experience as the everyday task. Yeah.
Okay. One other thing to think about too is I think we have to start changing our thinking when it comes to whether we want to call it automotive, and I agree with Kurt. Think of mobility. Think of this market. So we tend to think of that market historically as a hardware or a vehicle cycle, right? So think of what we introduced this week with an entire silicon platform to introduce up to a level 4 autonomous vehicle. So that doesn't mean you have to start there. Let's say a customer introduces this entire platform, level 2. You don't need to introduce a new vehicle or mid-model update. What you need is a software update. So what you're going to start to see is, as we can provide a complete silicon platform, customers can do updates to application-level experiences for customers out of the automotive cycle that we classically expect. And I think that's a shift that is pretty fundamental from the past that could allow, once the platform's there, these things to start moving at a much faster cycle or pace than we've seen in the past.
Right, just as a comment back, I think I'd agree with that. The other thing that I totally agree with you, because I think a lot of this is going to happen in trucking first, right? Platooning, all the things that we've been talking about, platooning, et cetera. Those things you can do, I think, in a much quicker time frame than automotive. So, I came here and I'm listening. All the stuff I've heard this week, most of it has been focused on automotive. But I think you're absolutely right. The mobility and especially trucking industry will probably change earlier because it's more contained.
Thanks for this lead, actually. I mean, I think I didn't speak about the platooning specifically. We've just completed a platooning field trial in Europe with all the large truck companies from Europe. I mean, it was for me an experience of a lifetime. They have these trucks driving at, I think, say 50 miles per hour with a distance of a few feet, literally, which is such a short distance that they save enormously fuel because the one is driving in the shadow of the front guy. In principle, you would only need a driver in the very first one because all the others are electronically coupled, which for the transportation industry is an enormous saving if you think about the drive times and all the legal requirements you have. And it makes it cleaner. And it makes it better in cities because you can, and that's what we show actually here, just outside the building, you can connect it to traffic lights and have like a green wave to get them very fast through cities. So totally agree. I think, and that's what Matt and Lars were saying, I mean, if the question is when will the world be full of only autonomous cars, I fear it's the 10 to 20 years thing which Lars was quoting. But there will be many confined areas before that and specific industries which will make use of it. And that might be smart cities, that might be trucks. I mean, I always think about the lift man in New York in the past, right? You needed a guy with the lift. That guy has disappeared. And for the same reason, the truck driver is going to disappear. I mean, this is going to happen, or on highways. Highways are easy for autonomous driving because you don't have bicycles, you don't have pedestrians. It makes it much easier. Robots with each other are easy to go. So I think if it is about will we see autonomous cars, I would say yes, we will see them latest 2020 in free traffic, but it will still be confined areas. And that's probably the mix. But I guess once people see the benefit and once also society sees the benefit, it might accelerate after that pretty quickly.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but haven't you also done this with ships, so it would broaden this to transportation, not just automotive?
Yeah.
Yeah, so.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in a way, we had the same discussion years ago about the drive-by-wire.
Yes.
I look at Ms. Stroh because we were in this discussion, I guess, 15 years ago, when it was about the incredible idea that car companies would replace the mechanical connection between a steering wheel and the wheels. I mean, it was this idea, oh, there is only a wire in between, which feels a bit loose, right? But when you told people that they fly every other week with an airplane, which is all fly-by-wire, I mean, that they abandoned mechanics long ago. Now, they have been fighting with redundancy electronics and all that shit earlier. I mean, we've been in this. But yes, I think it's absolutely not confined to the classic automotive, which makes it very interesting because then it becomes much more part of society.
Yeah, and it looks more like a cell phone now than it does anything else.
That I disagree with, but that's a different discussion. Okay, let me quote here one thing, which is really, and I unfortunately forgot the source, but I thought it was a very trustworthy research institute. They researched what's the amount of data a car is collecting in 1 hour. So imagine a car is driving somewhere overland and through a city for 1 full hour. And you have all the sensors on, all the beautiful stuff which is around Blue Box, all the classic vehicle dynamic systems, which is constantly producing data. The amount of that data in 1 hour equals what a typical smartphone user today does in 26 years.
Yeah.
So please forget about the complexity of a smartphone when you talk about cars. I mean, this is orders of magnitude in between.
I was thinking more of the software upgrades, but you're absolutely right. Okay.
Well, my life shouldn't depend on a software upgrade. Okay.
You know, as we look at the adoption of these technologies and we go back to the discussions this morning with Nicholas Negroponte, the role this plays in smart cities and autonomous driving, as you envision this, how does the advance of this technology, how does it reshape the automotive industry as a whole? Because now we have car companies that differentiate themselves on various elements that are going to go away with the vision that we're talking about here. How are car companies and the automotive industry going to respond to the adoption of these changes and what it might do to their business models and how they work?
Great crystal ball question.
I would say this is a big opportunity and a huge challenge for them at the same time. So very clearly. I mean, it starts with the fundamental question, is there going to be more cars in future or less cars? If you think about the idea of car sharing, which starts to take traction, and I guess Negroponte's whole idea about a smart city was that you would not have your own car there, but you would just share it. And that's why he says there is less cars in the city, and that's why the traffic is much better, and that's why you don't need all the parking space and all and all and all. And that led to a huge discussion, which is now finding two directions which are orthogonal. So there is one school of people who say the number of cars being produced will be less in future. And that's, of course, a horror scenario for the classic car industry. I mean, for them, that's just the wrong thing. But there is other people who say, with all of this, people will drive even more because it gets so much more convenient, it gets so much safer, the traffic is so much more congestion-free that actually the miles driven per year, and KPMG made a fantastic study about this, will be more, which would mean there is more cars in future, not less cars. Now, I don't know. I mean, yes, it's a crystal ball question. But I think your question is more to how are car companies dealing with it. I think they are pretty much in motion. Because, and I think about the 3D printed car which you showed, which took a weekend, I understand, to print it. I mean, this attracts new players. And I think the risk for the conventional or classic car industry is that there is people who go in there with a greenfield approach, which might look a little bit exotic, but they come to great results much faster than the classic industry used to do it. And that, I think, is for the smart guys, it's a big opportunity. For the dumb guys, it's a big, big risk. Now, again, they all need chips, which is why we are a bit agnostic to this.
No matter what.
This is a little bit of a follow-up question on the one just asked by Dale. My curiosity is, with this progress, I would expect that we're going to see more application-specific mobility devices. And let's just throw cars out the window when we look at what's going to happen. From a commercial aspect, I can see a device that gets off of a cargo ship, drives to a city, launches smaller mobility devices, and maybe ultimately launches drones, and then all comes back together at the cargo ship. Totally a different application scenario than what we currently see. Even on the commercial or even on the passenger end, are we going to see, you know, small single-person occupancy vehicles downtown taking people, commuting people from one office to another? And then is that even possible to have that scenario without a greenfield? I mean, can you have these devices driving along with the Ford F-350 dualies, and what's going to happen there?
Well, I think that's exactly the issue. I mean, what you describe is definitely this scenario of a smart city. That's exactly what it is. I mean, because it still has a level of individualism. Because eventually you could ask, why don't we just take all a bus? I mean, why do all of this if you could ride a subway or a bus? But there is a level of individualistic behavior that people still want to have their own thing for transportation. So that's why, yes, this is exactly where it should go. The challenge is the transition, because you will have a mixed mode of the F-150 and those little new mobility elements. Which is why I think what it will take is cities which have the courage to make a sharp step. And that's why we value so much what the Smart City Initiative is all about here in the US. Because we have this discussion here with Mayor Adler for Austin, for example. I mean, they do have ideas to make a sharp cut at a certain point and to actually transition in one go, at least for parts of the city, to only the new way of transportation. That's the only way to get there, because otherwise you always have the mixed mode, which doesn't work perfectly. I mean, if there is still two F-150s, they just block the rest from working. So, and by the way, this is not just in the US. We have very similar discussions in Singapore, which is also pretty advanced in this thinking. But it will take, and that's why, again, Negroponte, I think, just spoke to the right thing. It will take initiative also from the public sector in order to facilitate those transitions going forward.
But the good news is we have all the chips for all the examples that you described. So we are talking not only about car-to-car communication, but some companies approach us and say, can you do drone-to-drone communication? Anti-collision transponders. Yeah, these Boeing anti-collision transponders have a weight of 10 kilos. How about your little 14-gram modules? So what you see there is what we are trying to do. Invite others to play with our Lego blocks, so to say, and come up with new use cases. And you will see all these different means of transportation. Will it be, let's say, parcel delivery by drones or single-person scooters or F-650s? We have it all. Yeah?
And the single-person devices could, you know, drive themselves onto a mass transit.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
I think that's...
Do you have any actual partnerships in the works?
Yes, we actually work this, and that's actually, it's kind of part of the release we did yesterday on the Smart City extension, which was first about connected cars, and now we actually enhance it by RFID technology, which is exactly about seamless transport, where you have one device or one card or one authentication device, I would say, which lets you ride an autonomous shared car as well as public transport. And it all goes to the same bill at the end of the month, and it's all seamless. Because the one thing I think consumers just couldn't stand if it gets complicated and you need a separate ticket for each of them. And so this is about being seamless. And yes, this is specifically actually part of the Smart City initiative here.
So our view of what does smart mean? Smart means barrier-free, as Kurt just said. So if you have barrier-free transportation, you get it when you want to have it, but other than that, it's not a burden. So these type of really park and ride systems, so we are taking also from our sister business unit, security and connectivity, long-range RFIDs, for ticketing, for access control, really getting the gantries open or the gates open for parking spaces, all of that type of stuff we have, and we are trying to bring this into one flow for getting more barrier-free in megacities.
I think it's a great question, right? Because when we talk about autonomous vehicles, we typically think of changing the existing transportation. And as you know, you're referring to, there's all these potential areas for new mobility outside of the existing expectation, right? And you see a tremendous amount going on in the last mile, for lack of a better term, where it could be in malls, campuses, these areas where, sidewalks even, right, where these weren't expected, but they're going to start to evolve, and you know, the imagination's the limit in terms of what it might end up being. But I think the key is, no matter what, you know, we've made the point that the silicon will be needed underneath that, but I also think it's an important point, no matter how this evolves, the consumer wins as well, because the lifestyle and safety, all these things will be benefits that come out of this. So it's going to be fascinating.
Do we have a question over here? Okay.
Hi, this is Abhidhar from IDC. When I look at the blue box, it, to me, looking at the networking, compute, security capabilities that it has, it almost seems to me that the car is looking like a branch office or a remote data center on wheels. And that's the direction we seem to be going in. The reason I say that is that in the new world of autonomous cars, 3 companies come to mind immediately: Tesla, Google, and Apple. And my question is that these companies have very strong data center cloud capabilities, and I think the cloud is going to play a pretty important role at some point in time, not immediately, because a lot of the capabilities you talked about are within the blue box today, but that blue box will need to be interacting with the cloud, and capabilities and applications and so on will be pushed to it. One of the things that I see with these companies based in Silicon Valley is that they are very heavily involved in promoting and using open source, which is something I think is going to also play into this whole aspect. But I don't see companies, the traditional car companies, the ones that are based in Detroit and others, they have so far created closed boxes. It's like a Cisco or a Juniper type of box where the hardware and the software comes from one company. How do you see applications being onboarded or enabled by these traditional Detroit companies? I think the Silicon Valley companies are just going to move really fast.
Yeah, thanks for that question. That's a really good one. I think what is going to happen in the industry and what we're going to see is the ones who are capturing most of the value out of big data are the ones with the end customer access. So for example, someone who's shipping 10 million cars per year is basically selling to you and to me a new car. And then these car makers, they can, so the data that I generate with that car belongs to me as the end customer. That's out of question legally, globally. But of course, what these car companies can do is they can trade in with me the right to use my statistical data of the car. So in other words, if I buy a new Volkswagen or a new GM, they could come to me and say, hey, Lars, you get free map updates for 3 years. Would you like to give us for that your statistical drive data? Okay, then they have that drive data, and they can, of course, do great new things with that. Give you an example from my hometown. Hamburg is at the moment spending 4 million per year on getting these measurement teams out on the roads for finding potholes and repair the roads. Volkswagen could go there and say, you know what, for 2 million, we are providing you that data where all the car drivers on a normal 50-kilometer road are decelerating to 20 kilometers and are accelerating again. I guess there you should send your repair squad. I tell you exactly where the window wipers are on, exactly there by the meter it is raining, and these type of how the traffic flow is. You have very accurate data. They will have 10 million rolling sensor platforms on the roads, and they can use that. It is very, very difficult for a Google, for an Apple, or for a Tesla to come to that figures of rolling sensor platforms. So what I see is at the moment they have quite some momentum there. And what they are doing, of course, is they simply need to make sure that never you are shocked and your trust is gone away because someone has hacked from that statistical data into your private tracking. So if you could derive from there is a car on a Hamburg road to Lars has been here or there, this is what I do not want to have. So we are in deep discussions with those guys how to best set up, let's say, encapsulated app stores because also by no means Apple is an open source company. They have their enclosed app stores, and the car makers are doing the same. But then, of course, how do you make sure that these app stores, that this data transfer, these updates over the air, are never compromised? And what we are doing there is we are using our crypto chips that you're sitting on very likely if you have your wallet in the pocket. So from the banking cards so this, of course, what we're trying to bring in there to not only in the banking domain make that system secure, but also lifting that over, as Kurt said prior, to the car domain.
So I know where your question is going to, and I think you are right. The only thing we shouldn't forget is that the car is still a mechanical object from a physics perspective, because it's a pretty heavy thing which moves at a high speed, which according to the laws of physics has a huge momentum, which means managing and controlling that big momentum in a safe way is a competence which the traditional car companies have. And that is something, it's a little bit too much downplayed in the current discussion, because it almost sounds like it's really just a server farm on wheels, and it's all managed through the cloud. It is not, because it still have 4 wheels with rubber, which have a certain friction with the road, right? And I mean, these guys have built up quite some competence in managing this in a pretty good way. So that is the one thing in this whole equation which doesn't make it as easy as it sounds from your question for the others. However, there is a lot of the new innovation where these new entrants have so much more, say, flexibility, agility, and experience, that it's an interesting battle. I mean, you had the same question before. It's about the same. And that's why I said when I opened this session, I think this industry is up for much more disruption and change in the next few years than it has ever seen in its whole industry, and that's exactly for that reason. Now, we can't predict which way it's going to go. I mean, it's really hard to say, but it's obvious that this is not a paper exercise. I mean, the change is happening right now.
Also, no, we haven't really talked about security here, but there's a panel at 4:30 in the broader session just focused on security, automotive security. So I encourage everyone
and
to
check
attend
if we are
that.
not careful, we are sitting here until 4:30. So I'm not
No,
sure
no,
what
no,
the
no.
what the
We're
timeline
going to
is.
take one quick last question, and that's all. Who's got a mic?
I wanted to go back to this gentleman's topic earlier and talk about upgradability. He talked about how auto cycles move so slowly. But what we're seeing now is a chance to do over-the-air updates with what Tesla's doing. We actually have seen people talk about doing hardware updates. In fact, another chip maker, I haven't really seen it in place yet. But as we're looking at the blue box concept and product, can you talk a bit about how we're going to be able to have cars updatable over the course of their lifetime?
Matt, I think that was yours.
Sure. So I'll answer it at 2 levels, right? So first of all, I think having the hardware platform is foundational to that, so that's a key piece. I think having the inherent security in place to allow access mid-cycle is also a key foundational element, right? You can't do over-the-air updates unless it's secure, right? So getting that foundation in place. And then having a hardware capability that facilitates over-the-air is also fundamental. And then having the over-air capability. So all those elements are coming into place in a very short amount of time. And something like the blue box is absolutely designed to be able to support that. So it has the security, it has the safety behind it, it has the over-the-air capability to support that. And that's what we're thinking about, right?
So
exactly
the trouble with your question is not a technical one. This is just possible. It's not very complicated. I mean, if you have a Wi-Fi interface or an Ethernet connection, you could actually do this update. And I mean, Tesla is doing this today. This is not something which is not possible. The challenge is a different one. The challenge is the commercial model behind this, because at least the traditional car companies, they haven't been used to actually charge for those updates. The way, and I think we discussed about it earlier in the week, the way they make their money is they sell optional features in the first place. But then you are stuck with those options. So I think the industry has to learn to think it differently, to make the car complete in the first place, but actually unlock different features, buy over-the-air updates, and sell those unlocks. I mean, it's just a different, it just puts it upside down, right? Which is something you could never do in a mechanical industry. I mean, and that's why they've never done it in the past. But now when all of the, let's say, when the feature content is more designed or sized by how much you unlock by software, then it becomes a service business. And this goes back to your initial question. I mean, there are guys who know how to run service businesses, and others know it less. So that's why I guess you will first find this with companies who have a different background than automotive.
I want to thank our panelists today and thank everyone for joining us, and the lunch. Thank you very much, Jack.
Absolutely.
So thank you very much.
Thank you.